The orphanage had no food for Thanksgiving. A mysterious rancher left a wagon full of love. The dawn sky over St. Agnes Orphan Home looked bruised, purple clouds swollen with snow and a wind that carried the scent of winter's bite. The old building creaked against the gusts, its roof shingles rattling like loose prayer beads. Inside, Sister Marin moved through the dim kitchen, lantern in hand, her breath ghosting in front of her. She opened the pantry one more time, praying something, anything, might have appeared overnight. But the shelves remained heartbreaking in their simplicity. 3 potatoes, a jar of lard, half a sack of flour with a mouse-chewed corner, and a handful of dried beans, not enough to fill even the smallest stomach. Her shoulders sagged. From the hallway, bare feet pattered against wood. 6-year-old Annie, hair in wild morning curls, peeked in with sleepy eyes. "Sister Marin, is breakfast ready?" Marin forced a smile that hid every worry she carried. "Soon, little dove. Go sit with the others. I'll bring what we have." Annie nodded and skipped away, humming a tune of her own invention, the kind children sing when they believe the world is kinder than it sometimes is. Marin took a steadying breath, ladling hot water into a pot, adding the last of the flour to make a thin paste she hoped could pass for porridge. Behind her, the older girls set plates, careful not to show they noticed the portions shrinking each week. When Marin brought the pot to the long wooden table, the children bowed their heads instinctively. "Let us give thanks," she said. A chorus of small voices filled the room. But as the prayer ended, little Thomas tugged her sleeve. His voice trembled with the kind of fear no child his age should know. "Sister, will there be turkey on Thanksgiving? Like last year?" The table went quiet. Every face, 12 boys, 9 girls, 2 babies in high chairs, turned toward her. "I's trusting. I's starving not just for food but for reassurance." Marin knelt so she was level with Thomas. She placed a hand on his cheek. "My sweet boy, I don't yet know how, but I believe, truly, that God will not let us be forgotten." He nodded slowly, accepting her faith because he had so little of his own. As the children ate their thin breakfast without complaint, Marin stepped aside, clutching her rosary. The window beside her rattled as another cold wind blew against it. She stared out at the barren yard, the leafless trees, and the distant farmland where no one had enough to share this year. For the first time since she'd taken her vows, her prayer trembled. "Lord, I don't care about myself. But these children, give them one day. One day to feel full." Her eyes stung. She wiped them quickly. The children never needed to see her cry. They needed her to be a mountain, even if she felt as fragile as glass. Later, after putting the youngest ones down for naps and stoking the fire with the last pieces of good wood, she sat beside the window with her shawl wrapped tight. Outside, snowflakes drifted slowly from the gray heavens, landing softly on the empty yard. And Sister Marin whispered into the quiet, "If ever we needed a miracle, it is now." She didn't know that even as the snow deepened and the wind wailed, someone somewhere was already preparing one. The next morning the world woke silent and white. A thin blanket of snow lay across the yard, untouched except for the small footprints of the children who had woken early to chase each other through the hallway. Sister Marin stepped onto the porch, pulling her shawl tight against the sharp cold. She intended only to collect water from the pump, but she stopped dead in her tracks. There, standing bold as sunrise, was a wagon that hadn't been there last night. Its wheels were half buried in fresh snow, steam curling from the nostrils of the 2 chestnut horses still hitched to it. They stood calm as if they had been waiting for someone to wake. The wagon itself looked like something out of a dream. Barrels of apples, burlap sacks marked flour and sugar, baskets overflowing with vegetables, tins of butter and jars of honey, smoked turkey wrapped in white cloth, even a crate of early winter oranges, rare and expensive. Marin covered her mouth with both hands. Tears pricked hot behind her eyes at the impossibility of it. She approached slowly, almost afraid the vision would dissolve like frost in sunlight. But the closer she came, the more real it became. The scent of smoked meat, the crisp tang of apples, the warmth of the horses' bodies radiating into the icy air. There was no note, no signature, nothing but abundance. And right in the center of the load, resting atop a folded blanket, was a small carved wooden heart. Homemade, smooth, simple, touched by hands that cared. Behind her came gasps. The children had gathered at the porch railing, wide-eyed and shivering in their nightshirts. "Sister Marin." Annie squealed. "Is it for us?" Marin turned, her voice barely steady. "Yes, little dove. It's for us." The children erupted in cheers, bounding down the steps before she could stop them. They crowded around the wagon, running their fingers over the apples, hugging the bags of flour like they were toys. Elliot, the oldest boy at 13, circled around the wagon, studying the tracks. "Whoever brought this came early," he said, kneeling to examine the snow. "Before sunrise. Look, the horse prints are shallow." The snow covered the rest. Marin joined him. The tracks faded into the distance like a half-remembered dream. Whoever did this came quietly, gave generously, and left without waiting for thanks. Her heart thudded with awe. The littlest boy, Samuel, tried to climb into the wagon and promptly got stuck, dangling by his coat. The children laughed until they wheezed. Marin pulled him down, brushing snow from his curls. "Careful, sweetheart," she said, but she was smiling too. A miracle had arrived in their yard. A miracle big enough to fill a table. And small enough to fit in the palm of her hand, in the shape of that carved wooden heart. She lifted it carefully. It was smooth and warm from the sun, with a tiny groove at the top like it had once hung on a string. The craftsmanship was humble, but the intention was unmistakable. Someone out there didn't want praise. Someone simply wanted the children fed. Marin whispered, almost to herself, "Angels come in many forms." But deep inside, a quiet curiosity bloomed. Who would do such a thing, and hide their name? And why did a simple wooden heart make her own heart feel suddenly full, suddenly warm, suddenly seen? As the children began carrying food inside in excited, stumbling armfuls, Sister Marin stood beside the wagon one last moment. The horses nickered softly, almost as if urging her. Find him. Know him. And for the first time in months she felt something rise in her chest. Hope with a direction. The orphanage felt different that morning, lighter, brighter, as if the walls themselves breathed easier. The children buzzed around the kitchen like bees preparing for a feast, washing apples, scrubbing potatoes, sneaking tastes of honey whenever they thought Sister Marin wasn't looking. But Marin's mind was elsewhere. She couldn't shake the image of the horses standing in the snow, the abundance in the wagon, and most of all, the wooden heart carved by a steady, patient hand. As the older girls washed vegetables, Marin slipped on her winter coat. Elliot, drying his hands on a towel, looked at her suspiciously. "You're going to find him, aren't you?" Marin tied her shawl with a quiet determination. "I need to thank whoever helped us." Elliot leaned on the counter like a boy pretending to be a man. "Sister, some folks don't want thanks." A soft smile tugged at her lips. "And some good deeds deserve to be acknowledged." She mounted the orphanage's old mare, Daisy, and headed down the frosty trail into town. Snow had begun to fall again, tiny flakes that melted on her eyelashes. The world felt hushed as if waiting. The general store. Her first stop was Mr. Wallace's general store. Bells jingled overhead as she stepped inside, the smell of tobacco and pine soap crowding the air. Mr. Wallace looked up from behind the counter. "Mornin', sister. Need supplies." She explained the wagon, the food, the wooden heart. His eyebrows rose inch by inch. "Strange thing," he said thoughtfully. "Didn't sell that much flour or sugar to anyone this week. But someone did order a batch of apples delivered from the North Ranches." Her pulse quickened. "Who?" He shook his head. "Paid cash. Didn't leave a name. Just said the apples were needed for children." Marin thanked him and headed to her next stop. The blacksmith. The blacksmith shop glowed with heat, orange sparks flying every time Big Tom Hargreaves struck his hammer against the anvil. When Marin described the wagon, he froze mid-swing. He wiped sweat from his brow and stared at her with a curious expression. "What kind of wagon?" She described everything, the wood, the horses, the carved heart. Big Tom snorted, folding his arms. "Only man I know who drives a rig like that, ain't one for visitors." Marin's heart thumped. "Who is he?" Tom jerked his chin westward toward the rolling ridge beyond the town. "Elias Rourke. Owns the big ranch sittin' on the high ground." The name rippled through her memory, spoken quietly, almost reverently by townsfolk. She'd heard rumors. A wealthy cattleman. A widower. A man who kept to himself. Tom added, softer now. "He ain't cruel. Just carries a world of hurt." Marin felt something in her chest tighten. "Thank you, Tom." The ride to the ridge. The sky darkened as she rode toward the valley. Snowflakes thickened, swirling around her like drifting feathers. Daisy trudged steadily up the slope, hooves crunching in the crusting snow. Halfway up, an old gate appeared, iron, ornate, far too fine for a simple ranch. Beyond it, the land stretched wide and clean, dotted with cattle and fenced pastures. Lone pines rose like sentinels along the hillside. The Rourke Ranch. A place built by someone who valued order, work, and maybe once, family. Marin swallowed her nerves and nudged Daisy forward. The doorway to a hidden heart. The main house came into view, a sprawling lodge-style home with tall windows that reflected the snowy light. Smoke rose steadily from the stone chimney. The porch railings were carved with intricate Western patterns, stars, antlers, and swirling vines. She dismounted, her boots crunching in the snow. For a moment she hesitated. Should she turn back? What if he didn't want to be found? But she remembered the faces of the children, smiling, laughing, warm for the first time in weeks. She knocked. The door opened almost immediately, as if he'd been standing right behind it the whole time. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair made wavier by the cold and eyes the color of storm-washed earth. His face was handsome but worn by something deeper than weather. Elias Rourke. He looked at her as though he already knew exactly why she had come. Marin gathered her courage. "Mr. Rourke, I'm Sister Marin from St. Agnes. I believe you know why I'm here." He held her gaze for a long moment, so long she wondered if he'd deny everything. Then he stepped aside slightly, not quite inviting her in but not closing the door either. His voice was deep, low, almost reluctant. "You found me quicker than I expected, sister." The warm air inside the Rourke ranch house wrapped around Sister Marin like a blanket. After the bite of the cold outside, the sudden heat made her cheeks bloom red. She stepped in cautiously, unsure if Elias truly wanted her there or simply didn't know how to refuse a nun standing in the snow. The door shut behind them with a deep wooden thud. The house was quiet, too quiet for a place that should have held laughter. A large stone fireplace dominated the room. Flames crackled, casting a soft amber glow over polished floors and a long dining table that looked like it hadn't seen company in years. A single place setting remained at one end, untouched. Marin noticed instantly. This was a house full of space, but empty of life. Elias removed his gloves and hat, tossing them onto a chair with casual precision. He moved like a man who did not need to think about physical things. His strength lived in his every gesture. "Coffee?" he asked, already heading toward the kitchen. Marin followed him, clasping her hands to keep them from shaking. Something about Elias Rourke's presence made her heart beat in unfamiliar rhythms. He wasn't unkind. He simply carried silence the way other men carried pride. In the kitchen he set a steaming mug in front of her. She wrapped her fingers around it gratefully. "Mr. Rourke," she began softly, "I came to thank you." He cut her off gently but firmly. "Don't." She blinked. "Don't, thank you?" He leaned against the counter, arms crossed over his chest. "I don't do things for recognition. I don't need anyone praising me." Marin held his gaze, steadying her breath. The children deserve to know someone cares. Something flickered in his eyes. Or maybe a memory. He looked away. The photograph. Marin's attention drifted around the kitchen, and her eyes landed on a framed photograph on the mantel in the adjoining room. A woman with gentle eyes and a little boy with a crooked smile. Elias followed her gaze. His jaw tightened. His voice dropped to a level that felt dangerous, not because it threatened her but because it threatened him. "My wife and son." Marin turned to him slowly. "They're beautiful." His exhale was sharp, like he'd been hit. They were. Silence spread between them, thick, weighted, tender. Elias set his hand on the back of a chair, gripping it as if steadying himself against memories that wanted to pull him under. "3 winters ago," he said. "Snowstorm came in fast. Wagon tipped on Black Elk Hill. I couldn't get to them in time." He laughed once, humorless. "Town thinks I keep to myself because I'm stubborn. Truth is, I'm just trying to survive each day without drowning in what I lost." Marin's heart broke for him. Not just for the tragedy but for the way he had clearly carried it, alone, silent, punishing himself. She stepped toward him, her voice gentle but firm. "Suffering in solitude is not a vow God ever asks us to take." He looked up sharply, meeting her eyes. Marin continued, "Doing good, helping those children, that isn't betrayal. It doesn't replace your wife or your son. It honors them." Elias swallowed hard. His chest rose and fell like the words had struck something deep inside. "Maybe." His voice cracked, barely audible. "Or maybe I'm just trying to pretend I'm still the man they loved." Marin shook her head, her voice warm, almost fierce in its softness. "You're that man. And what you did for those children proves it." For the first time Elias looked at her fully, no walls, no guarded silence. Just raw, vulnerable humanity. She didn't avert her eyes. Something softens. He cleared his throat, breaking the intensity. "You rode all this way in the cold. Did you even eat breakfast?" Marin smiled faintly. Thin porridge. Mostly water. Elias muttered something under his breath, frustration, guilt, something like protectiveness, and pulled bread from a tin, slicing it thick. He set it in front of her with a jar of blackberry preserves. Eat, he said. She did. Not because she was hungry, though she was, but because she sensed he needed her to. Needed to feel useful. Needed to feel like he could still care for someone. As she ate, Elias watched, not staring but observing as if making sure she didn't disappear. After a moment he spoke again, softly. Almost tentative. Sister, why did you come here? Truly? Marin set down her bread. Because gratitude deserves a face. And because I felt. She hesitated, searching for truth. That someone who gives so much should not spend life alone in silence. Elias inhaled slowly, like her words stirred something he hadn't allowed to move in a long time. A softness entered his expression. A small, cautious thaw. A shift in the air. You're different from the others, Sister Marin, he murmured. Most folks look at me like I'm a ghost haunting my own land. She offered a gentle smile. You're not a ghost, Elias. You're a man with a good heart. The use of his first name surprised him, but he didn't correct her. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the land in white. Inside, something subtle shifted, like two souls acknowledging each other for the first time. Elias reached for his coat, nodding toward the door. I'll hitch your mare for the ride home. Snow's thickening. She followed him, heart warm, steps lighter. And as he opened the door for her, for a fleeting second their hands brushed. The spark was small, soft, but enough to make both of them pause, breath caught in the cold air. The snow had thickened into soft, swirling sheets by the time Elias finished hitching Daisy to the post. His movements were efficient, almost military, yet Marin sensed a subtle tremor in him, an internal conflict he couldn't quite hide. He helped her step down from the porch, his hand warm even through his gloves. For a moment neither spoke. Snowflakes caught in his dark hair and melted down his temples like silver tears. Marin gathered her courage. Elias. He lifted his head, eyes steady on hers. The children would love for you to join us for Thanksgiving dinner. The words left her with a trembling hope she didn't fully understand. She wasn't asking only for the children. She was asking for him, this wounded man who had spent too long alone. Her invitation hung in the cold air between them. Elias's expression shifted, surprise, then fear, then something deeper. He stepped back slightly, jaw clenched. Sister. I can't. The refusal came quick, almost rehearsed. Marin felt it like a small sting, but she didn't retreat. Why not? He looked toward the distant ridge as if searching for an answer in the wind. I'm not ready. His voice was sandpaper, rough, ashamed, honest. I don't belong in a place filled with laughter. Not yet. Marin stepped closer, snow crunching softly beneath her boots. Elias, they already know you. Even if they don't know your name. His eyes flickered. She continued, gentler. You fed them when no one else could. You gave them warmth. You gave them hope. A flash of emotion crossed his face, pain mixed with yearning. You don't understand, he whispered. I don't know how to be around children anymore. It hurts. Marin's breath caught. Of course it did. She placed a hand on his forearm, just enough to show compassion, not enough to intrude on his grief. You don't have to talk. You don't have to do anything. Just sit with us. Let them feel the presence of the man who chose kindness. Elias exhaled shakily, eyes shutting for a moment. The snow fell harder. The world grew quieter. Finally he shook his head, slow and heavy. Not this year. Marin felt the disappointment slide into her bones, but she didn't let it show. Instead she gave him a tender, understanding smile. Then next year, she said softly, I will ask again. Elias's eyes snapped open, startled. She wasn't pushing him. She wasn't demanding he heal instantly. She was simply giving him time. Time, and space to come back to life. For a moment, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Sister, you're persistent. Marin lifted a brow. And you're generous. We each have our burdens to carry. They stood quietly under the snowfall, something wordless passing between them. A recognition, a promise, a thread of connection neither could name. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a small wool blanket. For the babies, he said gruffly. The nights turn bitter this time of year. Marin accepted it, her chest tightening. You care. Perhaps more than he wanted to. A hidden witness. As she mounted Daisy, Elias kept a polite distance. But his eyes softened, following her movements with a protective instinct he tried to hide. Marin pulled her shawl tighter. Goodbye, Elias. And, thank you. He touched his hat brim. Safe ride home, Sister Marin. She guided the mare forward through the thickening snow. And though she didn't turn around, she felt him watching. At the halfway mark down the ridge, Marin slowed the mare and allowed herself one glance back. Elias stood at the top of the hill, just outside his porch, coat whipping in the wind, watching her disappear into the white as if letting go hurt more than he expected. That evening at the orphanage. Back at St. Agnes, the children erupted with stories when they saw her return. Sister. Look. We're baking pies. Annie stuck her hand in the honey jar again. Marin laughed, hugging them close. But her heart lingered on the ridge, where a lonely rancher stood staring into the snow. And later, when the children slept soundly, bellies full for the first time in weeks, she knelt by her window and whispered a prayer. Not just of thanks for the food, but for Elias, the man who had given without expecting a single thing in return. Lord, she murmured, help him see that he still belongs somewhere. She didn't know that at that very moment, out beyond the trees, Elias sat in the dark on his porch, watching the glow of the orphanage through drifting snow. A faint, wistful smile ghosted his lips. He stayed there until the light went out. The year rolled by like a wagon wheel on a long, dusty trail, slow at times, hurried at others, but always moving. The orphanage, strengthened by winter prayers and spring gardens, endured as it always had. Sister Mercy often found herself pausing at the top of the hill where she'd watched the wagon vanish a year ago, wondering if she'd imagined the entire thing. But the children never forgot. Every night, during closing prayers, little voices whispered, God bless the cowboy who fed us. God keep the rancher warm. God help him know he's welcome. And each time they prayed, something in Sister Mercy's heart tugged. She didn't admit it aloud, not even to herself, but she missed him. She missed his quiet humility, the way he couldn't look at her for too long without his throat tightening, the grief tucked behind his eyes like a shadow he still carried. She missed the man who gave without wanting thanks. Thanksgiving Eve 1 year later, dawned cold and wind-bitten. Frost coiled around window frames. The children shivered awake under quilts. Sister Mercy tied her apron and whispered a small prayer for provision. They had enough to make a modest meal this year, not abundance but survival. She was grateful. Still, she found herself glancing out the window far more often than the weather required. By noon, the sky had darkened with snow clouds. She sent the older children to gather wood. She stirred the pot of stew and reminded herself not to expect miracles twice. But miracles, it seemed, had a sense of timing. The sound that made every child freeze. It began softly, just a subtle creak of wagon wheels fighting frozen earth. Then came the jingle of harness bells. Then the thump of hooves. The children reacted first. He's back. It's him. Sister Mercy. He came. She dropped the ladle. Her breath hitched. For a heartbeat she couldn't move. Then she ran. She burst through the orphanage door, shawl flapping around her shoulders as cold air stabbed at her cheeks. The children tumbled out behind her like excited ducklings, squealing and pushing. And there, slowly cresting the snowy path, was a familiar wagon. But this time, the wagon wasn't just full of food. It was decorated, strings of dried oranges, cranberries, evergreen sprigs. A glossy pie sat proudly at the very top. Fresh blankets were folded along the sides. There were 2 turkeys, fresh apples, even jars of honey sealed with wax. And driving the wagon, rein steady in his weathered hands, was Rhett Kerrigan, hat low, eyes the same soft storm gray she remembered. He halted the horses and slid off the seat, boots crunching deep into the snow. He looked different. Still rugged, still strong, but something had eased in him. His shoulders didn't sag with grief. His face held color. His gaze, when it rose to hers, didn't shy away. Sister Mercy walked toward him, heart pounding in a way that surprised her. You came back, she whispered. His breath escaped in the form of a cloud. Ma'am? I couldn't stay away. The children swarmed him instantly, pulling at his coat, hugging him around the waist, shouting thanks and memories and questions all at once. He laughed, an unguarded, warm sound that seemed to thaw the very air around him. Sister Mercy watched, hands clasped over her chest. Something bloomed under her ribs. The invitation that changed everything. When the children finally cleared enough space for her to speak, she stepped forward. Rhett, won't you join us this year? Last Thanksgiving the question had made him flinch. This year he didn't look away. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't try to escape. He simply studied her, really studied her, like seeing her fully for the first time. Only if you'll save me a seat right next to you, he said gently. Her breath caught. The children shrieked with joy. And Rhett Kerrigan, wealthy rancher, lonely widower, the man who had once fed them from the shadows, stepped inside the orphanage not as a stranger, not as a ghost of generosity, but as someone who intended to stay. Even if he didn't know it yet, Sister Mercy did. This Thanksgiving he wasn't delivering a wagon full of love. He was becoming part of the family who would give it right back. The orphanage dining hall glowed like a lantern against the deepening twilight. Candles flickered on mismatched tables, quilts hung across the windows to block the draft. The smell of turkey and herbs filled the room, warm, rich, comforting. It wasn't a feast like the grand ranch houses served, but it was enough, and it was shared with joy. Rhett Kerrigan stood in the doorway a moment, hat in hand, eyes sweeping over the room that hummed with life. Children chasing each other, wooden spoons clattering, laughter bouncing off the walls. He swallowed hard. It had been years since he'd been inside a room full of warmth like this. Softer than any fire, he thought. Sister Mercy approached him, cheeks rosy from cooking, her habit dusted with flour. She looked like a small miracle herself. "You made all this happen," she said quietly. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. You've kept these children alive long before I ever drove a wagon up this hill." Her eyes warmed. "Maybe so. But you helped carry the weight." A child tugged his sleeve before he could answer. "Are you sitting next to Sister Mercy?" He cleared his throat. "If she'll allow it." "She saved you a seat," another child declared, dragging him toward the table. Sister Mercy laughed softly and followed, her hands folded in front of her. Rhett sat down, still uncertain, still a little shy, but his heart settling into something it hadn't felt in years, belonging. Grace before the meal. When everyone had taken their seats, Sister Mercy nodded to Rhett. "Would you like to say the blessing?" He froze. "Me? I haven't prayed out loud in a long time." She smiled gently. "Then you're long overdue." The children bowed their heads. The room fell silent. Rhett's voice came out rough, hesitant, but honest. "Lord, thank you. For food on the table. For warm hands and warm hearts. For second chances. And for this family." He paused, emotion tightening his throat. "Even if they don't realize they've become mine." Sister Mercy blinked back tears. "Amen," she whispered. The children echoed it. And the meal began. A quiet conversation by lamplight. Dinner stretched on with laughter, stories, and second servings. Rhett carved the turkey, helped small hands scoop mashed potatoes, and listened to the endless questions children asked only of people they trusted. By the time the plates were cleaned and the last slice of pie eaten, the children were nodding off in their chairs. One by one they were ushered to their dorm rooms. When the door clicked shut behind the last sleepy child, Sister Mercy found Rhett gathering dishes. "You don't have to help," she said. He shrugged. "Can't sit still after a meal like that. Too much happiness in one's stomach." They washed dishes side by side, sleeves rolled up, warm water steaming between them. It felt strangely intimate, two people who had carried loneliness for too long, suddenly sharing a small, ordinary task. When the last plate was rinsed, they stood in the quiet kitchen, only lamplight between them. "Rhett," she said softly, "why did you come back this year?" He looked down at his hands, then at her. Truly at her. "Because last year I left something here I didn't know how to name. And I've been missing it every day since." She held his gaze, heart steady and full. "And this year?" "This year," he exhaled. "I reckon I came to stay a little longer." "How long is longer?" Her voice barely above a whisper. He took a step toward her. Not bold. Not presuming. Just honest. "As long as you'll have me." The new tradition. Outside, snow began to fall in soft, heavy flakes. Inside, Sister Mercy opened the kitchen door and called to the empty dining hall. "Children, next Thanksgiving, guess who's coming back?" Tiny voices erupted from down the hallway. "Mr. Rhett. The rancher. The man who prays funny." Rhett laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Seems I've been drafted." Sister Mercy's smile was warm, steady, sure. "No," she said softly. "You've been welcomed." He felt the truth of it settle into his bones. Thanksgiving at the orphanage wasn't just a meal anymore. It was a tradition. A promise. A homecoming. And as Rhett looked at Sister Mercy, her eyes gentle, her presence steady, her heart wide enough to shelter every child on this lonely hill, he realized something simple and profound. He had arrived with a wagon full of love. But he was leaving with something even greater. A place to belong. And perhaps, someday, someone to belong with.